Maybe? I don't know. Let's find out. Alright, so we're going to be reviewing Mind Control, Entering into the Mind of the Jehovah's Witnesses by Melissa Dougherty. We'll see what she has to say while we're queuing up for our game. Hopefully this audio works correctly.
Today's topic is about
I'm playing it at
mind
1.25
control.
speed too.
Cue Twilight Zone music. When people think about mind control, a lot of things they think about are like brainwashing or people being forced to believe something. Mind control is really different. I see mind control as something that's more subtle. You don't really notice it, but we're going to talk about this today because the reason why I start with mind control with Jehovah's Witnesses or any high control religion is because you must understand why they're so hard to talk to. If you can understand mind control, you will understand the mind of the witness. Now, I know that this is going to be a long video already. I know, because there's so much information.
You do have to.
But I mean, this is a very important topic. We're going to talk about a few ways throughout this whole series on how you can penetrate that mind control, how to get past it. A lot of this information is out there for people to research. I have to give credit where credit is due and thank this man, Stephen Hassan. He used to be in the Mooney religion. I think they call it Unification Church. It's a cult. And after he was deprogrammed from leaving the Moonies, he went and got a lot of fancy degrees and became a cult expert. And this is the book that I have read in preparation for this video. I'm mainly going to focus on what he calls the bite model, which we will go over that later in this video. Also, other websites that have really helped me a lot with putting this information together, there's a lot of them. I will put these websites in the description of this video. A major one, and it's one of my favorite websites to refer to about Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's been around for a while, is jwfacts.com. It is a wealth of information. You will find a lot of this information that I'm going to share with you on their website. Another website that I always refer to and I really enjoy is a website called forjehovah.org. It's for people who are really trying to reach out to Jehovah's Witnesses. You can even get in contact with lots of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses on that website and try to get a little bit more insight on how to witness to them and what the beliefs are of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I find mind control to be a very fascinating topic because we can see this in many aspects of our lives. It could be political, it could be religious, it could be within relationships. And I think it's crucial to go over this before we really go over the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses to understand them and their mindsets. I'm assuming that most people that watch this video may not have a lot of experience with Jehovah's Witnesses and their teachings. I'm assuming that a lot of people that are watching this video are Christians who want to either learn more about Jehovah's Witnesses or maybe have a loved one that's lost in the religion and you want to know how to reach them. I'm hoping and praying that this video is a great resource for you. And if you guys have followed me for any amount of time, I'm really passionate about understanding the position of the person you're trying to reach first. Because I think once you understand that and you have insight on where they're coming from, you then have a better way to reach them because you understand their language. You understand their mind language, if that makes sense. So to start off, I'm actually going to quote the Watchtower in talking about mind control. You will see a lot of quotes in this whole series. You will see a lot of quotes in this video. I really want to back up the religious teachings that they have with what the religion actually says. So here's a quote. It says, "We cannot claim to love God, yet deny his word and channel of communication." Now, this is a very telling quote because you can't love God, yet deny his channel of communication. You can't love God and deny his organization. So before we start off with anything, right off the bat, understand that in the mind of the Jehovah's Witness, when you deny the organization, you're denying Jehovah God. They are one and the same. I'm also going to point out the definition of contextualization. Some people might know what that means. Some people may not. It's a fancy word for aiding comprehension when spreading the gospel. So in other words, to contextualize what you're saying means to tailor your presentation of the gospel that's dependent on the ears that are hearing it. You're not adapting your message. You are contextualizing it. You're understanding your audience and the sociological context that they are in, so they can understand what you're saying better. So let me give you an example of this. I have given this example before in a previous video that was talking about how the Jehovah's Witnesses brought me out of the New Age. It's a long story, but I actually heard this example in college. I took a sociology class and I really loved this class. I learned a lot about the function of people and how they function in society and how the person is different than the people and all this stuff. In this class, my sociology teacher was giving us a lesson on culture. and how in each culture in the world
This I would
differs from
agree
one
with, this
another,
culture
and
a bit.
how what we might think is appropriate in our
And I do
culture
think it makes
is
a
not
good
in
point.
another. So if you say something like, for example, handshaking might be completely off limits in one culture, and even knocking on somebody's door might be an offense. Whereas in other cultures, you stay outside the fence and yell their name. And it's understanding the culture and the context of
This
the
is what I'm
society
all
in which
about.
they
I
live.
think you
Well,
really
she was
should
giving an
try and
example of
understand
soup, instant soup,
the people you're talking
in
to.
this little town in Italy. And it was a long time ago that I remember this, so I'm not sure of the specifics of where in Italy or anything like this, but Italians take their food very seriously. Well, here in America,
I'm actually
we
going to
like
skip
instant soup.
forward a little
We
bit on this part of
eat
the
it
video.
often. It's
So
on our
she goes
grocery shelves,
over
and
this
we don't
instant
really
soup kind of thing, and how Italians wouldn't buy instant soup because it's really important for them to cook for their families and all that.
Spoiler alert. I've never seen this movie, but the mention when I first watched that movie, where I'm like, wow, I was told that the world is near
Okay, here she's
by
talking about Tangled.
looking at popular movies, for example. One example is 1984 by George Orwell. A lot of people have read this book. I love this book. I read it as a senior in high school. It was required reading, and I'm so glad I read it. It's really opened my eyes to how stuff like this can actually work. And granted, it's fiction. Parts of it have strings of truth in it. If you have not read 1984 by George Orwell, it's a very good book. And other movies where you might see cultish or cult-like themes, believe it or not, is I think Tangled, the movie Tangled, the Disney movie, because
this one I think she made a really good point here.
That the world is a certain
Tangled
way,
is
and there's a lot of fear
very
tactics.
good
There's a lot of
description or
unhealthy
example
love
of
given
mind
by
control.
Mother Gothel. And I mean, every time I watch this movie, it reminds me of the Jehovah's Witnesses, where Mother Gothel is the organization and Rapunzel's kind of like the witnesses that are just blindly following. But
I think that's
if you try to leave,
apt
if you try to look out and see, wow, there's more out there, maybe they're wrong, then you are definitely going to be shamed.
Illustration,
and you're going to be
analogy.
filled with fear. And I was really shocked when I first watched that movie, where I'm like, wow, maybe one of the writers was an ex-Jehovah's Witness. Another one is The Village,
Probably
because
not.
they're living under this world where they think that it's a reality. They think that that's really what's
came out well
true.
before the Witnesses
And
were a
their
thing.
leaders are the ones that are kind of keeping them, stuck in that world. And it's not until you fight your way out, basically, that you find out it's all a big lie. So, spoiler alert. I've never seen this movie, but The Manchurian Candidate, I hear, is a cultish movie, and then The Truman Show. So those are just some examples to give you where you might understand how the locks work, what mind control kind of looks like. But we're going to go into a lot more detail about this. So moving on, we're going to look at some main indicators of mind control. A religion that's practicing mind control techniques has the power to manipulate humans to believe unrealistic doctrine and engage in destructive behavior. Here are some examples: members of suicide cults and suicide bombers that sacrifice their own life and kill innocent members of the public. Parents that allow their child to die refusing medical treatments. Jehovah's Witnesses are known for refusing blood transfusions, which we'll get into later on in the series. Mothers and fathers are instructed to shun their own children, or children that shun their parents and siblings for life due to a difference of opinion over religion or morals. Next is the leadership deserves strict, unquestioning obedience. There's a saying, and I posted it a few weeks ago on my Instagram.
So I'm gonna
it says,
pause here for a second, because so far, everything that we're talking about definitely happens, albeit to maybe a lesser degree in certain groups of Christianity. I wouldn't say, like, shunning isn't a super common thing, but it is, to some extent. It's like Christians will talk about the loss they feel if, say, like, parents feel like they've lost their child, or they failed their child if they leave Christianity or are no longer a Christian and become atheists, for instance. And it's because, not necessarily for the same reasons that the witnesses would, but kind of it is. Like, they've lost their salvation. They've lost their hope. Like, they feel like they've lost this eternity that they thought they were going to have with them, right? And the same kind of thing with mind control. Well, I'm going to let her keep going, I think. It's very, very similar in a lot of ways to Christianity, the way they talk about losses. Like I said, it's not necessarily that they won't talk to their kid anymore, but all the time you hear about parents saying their kids are, or they're really sad that they're not going to be in heaven with them. I'm going to let her keep going.
Is that there's problems with the religions that have all the answers, is that they don't allow questions.
We'll pause again. So, yes. religions that have all the answers don't allow the questions. And I would agree that the witnesses definitely have that kind of on lockdown. They have much stricter control with, and she gets into this later in the video too, about the like snitching culture where, where witnesses don't want to tell their fellow witnesses or their good friends that are witnesses about any doubts that they have, because their friends will then go, oh, you're having doubts, we got to tell the elders so they can help you. And it's not even necessarily like a negative thing for witnesses to do that, or they think they're doing it to help, but it promotes this snitching culture, gossip culture of, oh, so-and-so's having trouble, they're not going out in field service enough, they must be having, they're a weak, they're spiritually weak is what they'll say. And again, it's the same kind of thing happens in Christian culture to a lesser degree. And it's not necessarily they have all the answers so they don't allow questions. It's not necessarily a discouraging of questions, but it's we have the answers so you don't have to worry. And a mentality of somebody out there somewhere has researched this, so the answers are there, and if you're doubting it, you just haven't done enough research. You just need to look into it more. Funnily enough, when I press on these deeper questions, you usually reach the answer of, well, we don't know for sure, you just got to have faith. But so this first point of the people with answers don't allow questions, I would say definitely applies, admittedly to a lesser degree, just to regular Christianity.
So a Jehovah's Witness will tell you, oh yeah, we ask questions. We're allowed to ask questions, but you're only allowed to ask certain questions. You don't question authority. That's a big no-no with Jehovah's
Same
Witnesses.
thing, though.
You do not question your leaders.
You don't question the Bible.
That is questioning Jehovah himself in the mind of the witness. So you blindly follow, but they will not think of it like they're blindly following their leadership, because they trust their leadership.
They move the authority one level down, so to speak, from
that you hear from God,
just the Bible to
then they're going to believe anything you say. They're going to believe everything you say. They're going to
trust going to be true of any Christian.
That what you are saying is from God. So as long as that trust is there, then what you're saying in that leadership is going to be received by the people underneath you who trust what you're saying, because you have convinced them that you're hearing from God. And because you hear from God, you shouldn't question them.
Yep.
You're questioning God himself then, as a result.
They've moved the level of authority
is that people
down
in
a
groups
layer,
that are under mind control believe that they alone are unique in teaching truth. They alone
God
have
directly
the truth. You are on the outside.
Men above
they are
God.
on the inside. They have special revelation, special knowledge.
Functionally
and
different
you're
as far
outside
as
of that,
the
which
mind
means you're
control
less than.
tactics that come
You're
from
not
that.
as spiritual as they are. You do not have the truth. They have the truth. You don't. And it's
Christianity
very black
would
and white.
say the same
it's
thing
very us
about
versus them, which we'll
other
get into that a little
religions.
bit later. Salvation is only possible
People who
through
aren't Christians
association
aren't
with
saved.
the group.
They don't
You
have
must
the
go
truth.
through the religion
Jesus
to
is
be
the
saved.
truth. We have the
Versus
truth.
Jesus alone
All
to be
of this
saved.
could be said
So
about
all the saving
mainstream
actions of
Christianity.
Jesus are put on the back burner because the religion or the group or the organization, in this case, the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower, steps in place of that saving action. Jesus is only part of it. As Christians, as people who read the Bible and study the Bible, even people who are not Christians can clearly read the Bible and see that this is the theology of Christianity, that it's through Jesus alone that we're saved. Jesus plus nothing.
That's one
not
interpretation
Jesus
of
plus anything. So to the mind of the witness, Jesus is part of it. It's Jesus plus the organization. You have to be a part of this organization to be real Christians. And they call it the truth, which we'll get into later on what that means to them.
Yep.
But to them, that's the truth. This is the truth of Christianity. And if you're not in it, then you're a part of Satan's world. So basically what the Watchtower says is you have to go through us in order to get to God. Instead of saying, oh, you have to go through Jesus to get to God,
and that,
you have to go through the Watchtower
that's not
to get to
functionally
God.
different
They
as
take
far
the
as
place
the
of
mind
Jesus.
control aspect
Lastly,
of it.
people who reject
You still
or
have a
leave
single,
the
you have
organization
to do
or religion
this
or
step
group are to be
to have the
strictly
truth.
shunned. Now, a Jehovah's Witness will say that they don't shun. They do. It's just a different term that they use.
They
and when I say
absolutely
shun,
do.
you guys, I'm talking like you don't exist. It doesn't matter if it's your child. It doesn't matter if it's your husband. It doesn't matter if it's your best friend. If they leave the religion or if they're disfellowshipped, which means that they are kicked out for some reason
Disassociate or
or another, which we'll get into what some of those reasons are later, you are
Recently,
to be
that's
shunned.
become
This is
fundamentally
a very
the same as far as how you're
psychological
treated. It
hold
didn't
to
used to
keep
be
you
so
in the
much,
group.
but it is
Because
now.
if you leave, you are leaving everything and everyone you know. A lot of people stay because their loved ones are in the group, not because they necessarily believe, but they would rather have their families than be shunned and be completely isolated. As we get more into doctrine, we will find out why they believe that and just a little bit more of the teachings that the organization holds on this topic. So this is a basic overview of things that we find in high control groups that practice these kinds of things. I am going to talk a little bit more about Stephen Hassan because his work is monumental for people who are trying to learn about those that are under mind control and in high control religions. So for those of you who are wondering about who he is, some people might know who he is because they maybe look into this stuff. His whole goal is to do this research to help people understand the mind of people that are in cults. So he specializes in this stuff. He does have a lot of good information in here.
Got a lot of good info.
I'm going to read some excerpts from part of his book that I think would be very helpful in moving forward. Now I'm going to look at chapter 4 and I'm going to read part of it to you because I think it's important to understand how and why people join cults. How does this happen? And for people who are wondering, is Jehovah's Witnesses a cult? It's a strong word, I get that, but
it absolutely is.
In this aspect, because of the mind control techniques and tactics that are used, they definitely would fall under the category of a cult. But in regards to people being susceptible to joining these high control groups, this is what he says. Most people would like to believe that they are in complete control of their mind at all times. But it is precisely this belief in our own invulnerability that allows cults to entrap unsuspecting recruits. There are 3 primary reasons why intelligent, educated people with stable backgrounds can be drawn into cults. First, there's a persuasive lack of awareness about cults and mind control, which is why I'm starting with this video, by the way, when it comes to this topic. Second, many situations make people more vulnerable to recruitment. For example, a person whose parents have recently separated or divorced will be more likely to listen to a recruiter who describes his group as one big happy family. Someone whose romantic relationship or marriage has just ended will be more susceptible to come-ons by an attractive person. Other common variables include death of a loved one, illness, loss of a job, graduation from high school or college, and moving to a new location, city, state, or country. Situational vulnerabilities occur in everyone's life.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a video about this where, and specifically the main, like the study book they do with new people that are interested, and how it really, really emphasizes all of these kinds of things and these type of life situations where people are more, as he puts it, situationally vulnerable, where they kind of prioritize or they target, so to speak, people in these vulnerable situations, people who just lost a loved one, where they can target them with their promises of everlasting life in paradise earth.
It's easy to see how people tend to be more vulnerable to an attractive recruiter offering community, love, and meaning during such episodes. A lot of the people that join the Jehovah's Witnesses do have some sort of emotional need of...
Yes, but this, again, to a potentially lesser degree, I suppose. Not really, though. I think this is about the same. It's a different promise. I mean, Christianity is promising heaven, and you get to see your loved ones again, and these kinds of things. So the people in these situations are going to be in a vulnerable state when presented with ideas like that, like these unprovable things of I need to turn that up a little bit, I think, for that to work. Yeah. The afterlife and things like where the parts of Christianity where you have to have faith, those promises about things that everybody wonders about, people in vulnerable situations are more apt to accept those things or be looking for those things.
Some sort. Some people are looking for truth. They're seeking God. They really do want to know more about spiritual things. And lo and behold, here comes a Jehovah's Witness who seems to have all of the answers. And we'll go over more of their strict routine and how they can just spit out answers left and right because they're so highly trained in what they believe. They know what they believe. And there's a saying that they'll get you in a doctrinal chokehold. If you do not know your Bible, they really will put up their spiritual dupe, so to speak, and really challenge what you believe, because they are drilled. If you are born in the Jehovah's Witness religion, you are drilled from the time you are young into what the religion teaches, what the Watchtower says, and that they have the truth. And that if you're outside the truth, you're going to die at Armageddon, which I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just keep that in mind, that the reasons why people join this religion is that they do seem confident sometimes in what they believe. And I think that's attractive to some people. On another note, also, a lot of this does apply to Mormons, LDS. You guys have heard me say this before, and I will always say this. I love Mormons. I love LDS people. But a lot of them will even admit that they know that there's lots of issues with the church. They, to some degree, even some of them will admit they know it's not true, but they still stay. And the reason why they stay is because of the community that the LDS have. They have a very strong sense of family and community, and to them, that is worth staying. So continuing reading in chapter 4, I have a feeling a lot of people will resonate with this particular paragraph that I'm about to read, because I think a lot of people can understand how we would look to fill a certain void if we have certain things that would make us more vulnerable to deception, whether it be getting in a bad relationship, a toxic religion, whatever the case may be. This is what he says. Finally, some individuals
before she goes into that. So yeah, she just said that where people are more susceptible to deception if they're vulnerable, but they're more susceptible to religion in general, I would say. If it offers the answers that people might be looking for. And I would almost say they're easier answers than anything else. You've got this afterlife. Things are going to get better there. And Jesus will help you through the things that you're going through now.
Psychological profiles that make recruitment easier for cults. In general, people who have difficulty thinking critically will be easier targets. People pleasers who seek the approval of their peer group out of insecurity, and anyone with low self-esteem will be more vulnerable to the peer pressure exerted by the cult recruiters. Individuals with learning disorders, drug or alcohol problems, unresolved sexual issues, pre-existing phobias, and other unresolved traumatic issues will also be easier targets. Cults seek out such vulnerabilities and use them against recruits, often making grandiose claims that their group will solve all of the person's problems. Now, this is really key, because I find this particular thing I find across a lot of religious institutions in general, because they try to take the place of God. I know that sounds weird, but in the Watchtower in particular, to narrow the focus here, you are promised happiness if you join Jehovah's organization. Now, it's never just Jesus.
No.
Okay, Jesus.
Jesus
alone fills that void.
Persecuted.
So for a little while, you're going to find comfort.
Happiness
for a little while, you're going to find exceptions. And this goes for anything. It could be any kind of group that you're going to feel really good at first. I call it the honeymoon phase. And whatever new thing it is, it's shiny, it's new, and you're there. This is why Jesus says he's the bread of life. This is why he's the living water, because when you follow him, when he's your everything, then you thirst no more, you hunger no more spiritually. And I think that's such a key point to make, because Jehovah's Witnesses fill their void through their religion and their religious works. You got to do so much, and then you never know if you're good enough. You never know if you're going to be surviving Armageddon. I mean, it's
so does she realize? I don't think she said, okay, well, Jehovah's Witnesses are promising people that they're going to be happy, which I don't think is actually true. They will, I mean, they might be kind of what they say in the beginning. They're promising these, it's always a happiness in the future promise. So you might get persecuted right now. Things might be hard right now because we're God's chosen people. So they're going to be people attacking us, is always the message. But you'll be happy. You'll get this paradise in the future where you have happiness. But it's the same thing in Christianity. You'll be persecuted for Jesus now because you're telling people things they might not want to hear. So you're persecuted for his sake. But you'll be happy in the future. You'll be with God and perfection, right? So they aren't, again, it's not functionally different as far as the mind control tactic that she's talking about here. It's the promise, or this claim, I guess, that they have the fix for your problem.
The guilt and the fear is paramount, and we'll get into a lot of the guilt and the fear later on in this video. Stephen Hassan, he writes this in his book. He basically has something called the bite model, and It's easy to remember. BITE is an acronym,
Strongly.
and each letter stands for something different. The B stands for behavior control. I is information control. T is thought control, and E is emotional control. We're going to go over each one
really good
and
information
how
to
it
watch out
applies
for,
to
not
Watchtower.
just
The
in
BITE
religious
method
stuff,
is a
in
simple way to
anything.
test if a group is engaged in persuasive coercion and mind control. Now, he did adapt this from another expert's research. There is a lot more in his book about the ins and outs of all of this, but I think that it's rather kind of genius, if you will, that Hassan made the BITE model, because it simplifies what types of things happen in these high control groups to get the outcome, the desired outcome of their followers. All right, so let's go over behavior control in the Watchtower Society. So the Watchtower Society has an intricate set of standards, of rules that's not specified in the Bible, but is very unique to the Watchtower. Things like your hair. So you have to be well kept. There is no beards. Beards are seen as worldly for the most part. Your clothing, they are dressed to the nines
Like
every Sunday when they
not
go
allowed.
to their Kingdom Hall. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness woman and you're walking into the Kingdom Hall every Sunday, your dress better not be above your knee. You are a Jehovah's Witness. You represent Jehovah. The length of your skirt better
Modern
be acceptable,
Christianity
as well as
doesn't have
everything
that
else
same
that should be
thing, but there's
acceptable. There are no
definitely-
tattoos.
well, I can't say all
the
of them,
movies
but
that you're
there's definitely
watching should
Christian
not
movements
be
that
anything that's worldly.
have similar
Music, they
dress
don't, and
code
this might surprise a lot of Christians, but
restrictions.
we'll get into why this is as we get into more of their doctrine, but they don't listen to Christian music. That's worldly, that's satanic. If you are a Jehovah's Witness and you are listening to Christian music of any kind, you are seen as a weak Jehovah's Witness. This is a no-no, because the songs, they're singing about Jesus, which is not okay. It's all about Jehovah.
Okay, so I want to point out, you're right, she's right. Witnesses don't listen to Christian music because they don't agree with, like, most of Christian music is about Jesus being God and Jesus being, they're not going to agree with the doctrinal message in Christian music, and that's why they shun it or avoid it. But at the same time, to the same point, there's a lot of Christians who won't listen to anything except for Christian music. They'll view everything else as worldly or satanic or demon influence. Not all Christians are like that, but there's a lot of them that are kind of fundamental or fundamentalist in that view. So this is, again, it's not functionally different. And some church, I don't know, the difference I would say is that some churches typically aren't going to say, oh, if you listen to anything other than Christian music, you're kicked out. And that's the step further that Jehovah's Witnesses would take it. Like, if you listen to Christmas music and you're a witness, you're definitely going to get talked to and potentially disfellowshipped if you keep doing it and you're not repentant. I guess your only chance is, oh, I didn't know it was a Christian or a Christmas song. And most churches aren't going to kick you out for listening to Metallica or AC/DC or whatever, but there are definitely Christians who will look at you differently and view you as spiritually weak or backslidden Christian, depending on your musical choice.
And you're idolizing Jesus, and that's weird to a Jehovah's Witness. But they don't listen to any Christian music. They actually think that we're in Satan's system, like we are in Satan's world. So as me being a Bible-believing Christian outside of the organization, they would view what I do and what I have to say as being basically on the side of Satan. But I could go on about that, but I think it's, another thing that the Watchtower emphasizes to help control their behavior. There is no gambling, there is no smoking, no political involvement at all. They don't vote, they don't run in politics, they don't do anything like that, they don't salute the flag, they stay away from that stuff. Holidays and entertainment are all dictated. Jehovah's Witnesses they don't celebrate any holidays. No birthdays, no Christmas, no Halloween, which some people might know them for that, but no Mother's Day, no Father's Day, Valentine's Day, nothing. It's all worldly and pagan. So it's important to point out that the Watchtower does dictate everything that the witness does. Who you hang out with. Are they a Jehovah's Witness? Are they a good Jehovah's Witness? Are they worldly? Your association matters. They call this bad association, which we'll get into more later, but who you associate with as a Jehovah's Witness does reflect on your standing in Jehovah's organization. So you better be hanging out with the right people. Hang out with other Jehovah's Witnesses that are in good standing and you're okay for the most part. Another thing that is really telling about high control groups is how rigid your schedule is. So for a Jehovah's Witness, the meetings that you attend each week and how many hours you have witnessing are considered acceptable and how to report it. So you should be spending more time with Jehovah. You should be spending more time going door to door. You should be spending more time witnessing to other people, whatever the case may be. And what this does is that this creates a community. You have a sense of belonging and it's very strong. because everybody else thinks like you. So the witness feels very special. They feel like they're part of this wonderful, united organization. So they feel special for reasons that are not in the Bible. They feel special because they're a part of this organization. So the list goes on. So outside the physical reality of controlling how you look, who you hang out with, hairstyles, things like that, what you can do with your free time, and also the major time commitment and expectation to be involved with all the meetings, all of them. If you're not at the Kingdom Hall on Sunday, somebody's going to know, and they're going to call you, and they're going to check on you and wonder why you weren't there. And you better have a good excuse. The other thing is individualism is discouraged and groupthink prevails.
Yep.
So what I mean by that is kind of like what I said before. I call this, I don't know if this is an appropriate term, but this is what it reminds me of, is like religious communism. You're all the same. You all must agree, and there's not much room for disagreement at all. There is no free thinking, and they are actually very open about this. When I've met with my Jehovah's Witnesses years ago, and I still keep in contact with some online, and they're very honest about this, that we should not be free thinkers. We should conform to what the Watchtower says, because free thinking is what got Eve in trouble. Had she obeyed, remember, they see God, and the Watchtower is the same thing. Had she obeyed, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. So free thinkers, that's bad. We should listen to everything the Watchtower says. And groupthink, let me just give you the definition of groupthink, because this is a good definition. The practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this. Groupthink. If you are that one person that says something that goes against the crowd, you're the black sheep. You know what it reminds me of? Now that I think of it, kind of the end of Titanic when the ship was going down. I can't remember the actress's character, but Kathy Bates was the actress. She did an amazing job in this movie. And I'm not sure if everybody's watched this movie, so spoiler alert, the ship goes down. But she was always kind of different than the people around her when it came to her humanity. So everybody is getting off the ship and they're getting in the lifeboats, and Kathy Bates' character is looking back at the ship going down, and there's a whole group of people in this little tiny ship that's taking them to safety. Kathy Bates' character is like, guys, these are our husbands back there. These are our people. These are, what's wrong with you people? We need to go back and help them. And nobody said anything. And the guy who was instructing the boat basically threatened her to shut her mouth. And I think that's a really good example of how groupthink works. If you're saying something that goes against the crowd, you're the enemy. And I think that that's a really dangerous position to be in, whether it's in religion, whether it's in a relationship, politics, whatever the case may be. Groupthink is real, and it can be a very persuasive tool when you're trying to get people to agree with your ideologies, whether they're right or wrong. You can't go against the Watchtower. You should not speak against the Watchtower. To disagree with the Watchtower or with anything that's being said or done in your congregation, which they call them congregations, by the way, not churches, then you are in a position of
it's Kingdom Halls.
You should not be different than all the other witnesses. Your beliefs should agree with all the other witnesses. So moving on, the last two that are bullet pointed here: the need for obedience and dependency. You are obedient to the organization and you are dependent on them. And then there's also a rigid set of rules that you have to follow and regulations as well. So these kinds of things compiled can all...
So on that last point, a rigid obedience to the organization functionally is the same as Christianity. Again, not surprisingly. They are just taking it one level lower. So you've got Christianity who says rigid obedience to Jesus is what you need. And you might never be able to achieve it. But that's the goal. Like, you're supposed to follow what he says. You're supposed to believe what the Bible says. And the witnesses kind of take it, and they just associate it down a little bit to you're following God's organization on earth who are interpreting the Bible, and they're the only ones that have the right interpretation of it. So in mainstream Christianity, it's the same idea. You're still following. I will give her this, that it's not quite as maybe rigid. Like, you're expected to follow Jesus' commands, but you're also expected to fail in most forms of Christianity that I've encountered. So nobody's going to do it perfectly, but that is the goal. Whereas witnesses, they do kind of take it that one extra step of you're supposed to follow the organization, and failing that is seen a bit more seriously, I guess. And that you can, if you fail and you don't, you're not sufficiently repentant to appease or convince the humans that you're dealing with that you're repentant, you could get kicked out, and that's a huge thing in the witnesses because you lose a lot.
Account for how they can control the behavior of the witness. All right, the next thing is repetitive behavior. The key to mind control is repetition. I want you to think of a hamster on a hamster wheel. That's a Jehovah's Witness. They are constantly working. Their routine and their schedule is very rigid. They don't have time to think. They don't have time to research. They're just doing what they're told. They're trying to be devout witnesses. They are doing what they think is right. Guys really love them because they are stressed. And this is just purely my opinion, but I find a very strong correlation with fibromyalgia and Jehovah's Witnesses. Maybe it's like a stress disease. I don't know, but I don't understand why so many of them have fibromyalgia. But then you look at their schedule and think about it. They're doing jobs, they have children, they have families, they have other responsibilities outside of just their religion, but the religion dominates their life. They are at the Kingdom Hall, they are going door to door, they are doing their Watchtower studies.
And that's another thing
I would arguably say that a devout Jehovah's Witness wouldn't have one day go by where they weren't doing something for Jehovah's Kingdom.
There's some people that take Christianity
because in the mind of the Jehovah's Witness, if you're not doing something for Jehovah's organization, if you're not doing something for the kingdom, then you might die at Armageddon. You may not be doing enough to survive Armageddon, which is part of their eschatology. And again, we will get into that, but that's a fear that motivates them. So I'm going to read some Watchtower quotes that are very pertinent to this topic. Okay, here's the first one. False religious propaganda
that's part of
from
what they
any
use
source
fear
should be avoided like poison. Really, since our Lord has used the faithful and discreet slave, which is the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, the men who run the organization, to convey to us sayings of everlasting life, why should we ever want to look anywhere else? Next, we must also be on guard against extended association with worldly people. Perhaps it's a neighbor, a school friend, a workmate, or a business associate. We may reason he respects the witnesses, he leads a clean life. And we do talk about the truth occasionally, yet the experience of others proves that in time we may even find ourselves preferring such worldly company to that of a spiritual brother or sister. What are some of the dangers of such a friendship? Now, these are older quotes, but these are quotes that stay true. These are beliefs and ideologies that are undergirded in Jehovah's Witness culture. So if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, now think about it for a second. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and your religion is telling you that everybody on the outside of the organization is evil and worldly, you're going to want to associate with other Jehovah's Witnesses. When in reality, if you were to actually go associate with other people, you might get a hint that maybe the organization's
She makes
wrong.
some good points here.
Think about Rapunzel, remember? That's kind of what I'm getting at right here. They want them to avoid the world.
I really like that
stay clenched in
analogy
into the organization. And these are just a few quotes. You can you can go online to their own website and look up their publications and find that this stuff is still true today. And it's very easy to find. All right, moving on to the I in the BITE model, which stands for information control. I personally find a lot of interest in this particular part of mind control because I just think it's shocking. It's weirdly fascinating to research these things and find out how it works.
A little bit, because she basically goes over the information control and how the witnesses discourage looking at anything that puts the organization or the witnesses in a bad light. And she makes some good points, but it's kind of, she repeats herself a little bit here. I'm going to skip forward a little bit, right about there. So basically the main things that we're skipping over here is just that the organization discourages any kind of apostate literature or publication or websites, anybody that's talking bad about them. And then she goes into, I think I've skipped forward to the right spot about the snitching culture, like I was talking about before, where if somebody's doubting or if you get caught looking at that, it's expected, or if you know that somebody else is looking at it, it's expected that you report them to the elders.
They're afraid. They're deathly afraid to go into the forest. So I hope that made sense. But
okay, so she was just talking about the village too, how that's another good analogy. Where Rapunzel was told not to leave the tower because it's scary out there. In the village, that movie, people are told not to go into the forest because you're going to die. It's the same kind of tactic. Like, you don't want to look at this outside information because it's going to damage you, kind of thing.
Is that you have to be really brave as a Jehovah's Witness to look at the literature of ex-members, because I believe that the governing body knows that the apostates can out them. They know that the apostates can give
They are
contrary
fully
information to what the watchtower is teaching. So usually what happens, especially in this information age, which is ironic because it's hard to control information if it's everywhere, which is why a lot of witnesses can easily do this kind of research.
That's why they say the only
let's say that you're a
website
Jehovah's
they
Witness, you
should go
come to
to
my
is
door. I invite you
jdub.org.
in and we start talking. And let's just say after a few months, or you're having general doubts, you start thinking something's not right. I need to do more research. So you start doing research and the snowball effect starts. And you start reading apostate material. And then you start agreeing with it.
This is generally the story.
I'm an apostate. What do?
Do
You understand why they didn't want you reading apostate material, because you would know the truth. And then you go try to warn others and you're looked at like how the watchtower wants you to be looked at. They want you to be looked at like you are filthy, that you left Jehovah's organization. How dare you leave the truth? You are satanic now. You are evil. You're trying to get me out of the truth, out of the one true religion. Be gone, be away from me. And it's really difficult to reach them in that way.
And that's very true for witnesses, in that they do put a heavy emphasis, and it's repeated very often, that people that have left, you shouldn't associate with them, and it's dangerous, and they're going to take you with them and tell you lies and all this stuff. And again, it's not the same necessarily in Christianity, but I do see a parallel in the things that you do hear a lot. Like witnesses will shun their own kids or their own parents or their own family and friends, people they grew up with. If they leave, it's over. It's very odd if you're looking at it from the outside. They just cut ties a lot of times. Some of them sneak around and still associate because they're having cognitive dissonance, but a lot of them do just cut ties. It's disgusting. But you get that to a lesser degree in Christianity. You often hear, like, if a parent's child leaves Christianity and they're gung-ho and they're super involved in their community church or whatever the case might be, they're sad now that their kid's not going to be in heaven with them, or they're worried that they're going to go to hell. And then you also hear things like, especially when Christians talk to atheists, oh, well, you were never really saved. You weren't a true Christian. It's the same kind of othering of the people that have left. Oh, now that you don't believe, there must be something wrong with you, because if I believe that you left and you have a good reason to have left, that means I might be wrong. It's the anti-questioning whether or not you're wrong mentality. And again, it's to a lesser degree a lot of times in mainstream Christianity, but the same thing is there. It's still present. I wrote some notes on this part. It's the you were never saved thing. You were never a true Christian. Or you get a lot of, they must have been hurt by the church, or somebody in the church wronged them, and that's why they left. It's not because they don't believe or they have a good reason not to believe anymore. It couldn't be that. If you let yourself think that they have good reasons, or this reasonable person left, then there's a risk or a chance that you might leave, or you might be wrong.
So just kind of putting a view for those that may not understand on why the watchtower does this and what that means to a Jehovah's Witness, and why they have to control the information that is given to the witness, because they trust the information given to them. So in their use of deception, they're deliberately holding back information. They can outright lie, and they distort the information to make it more acceptable to their members. And as I talked about before, the access to the information
they have to
outside
pass
of the organization
that the witness
is discouraged or minimized. And this includes things like in everyday life, watching TV, magazines, books, things like that. All right, so the next thing that they do is compartmentalization of information. So what I mean by this is that it's like outsider information versus insider information. And even some businesses can do this. But if you're somebody who is kind of like one of the many people employed by a company, you're not going to necessarily know the ins and outs of how the company functions. So the more important doctrines, the inside core information is always up here at the top, and all the little people just do what they're told. The information that is made up at the top and the information given from the top is not easily accessible. You can't just go talk to a governing body member, so to speak, and because they're kind of untouchable. And then beyond that, because they are the leadership, they decide what you need to know, and they kind of keep away from the other information that would seem critical.
I will say that has changed recently
of their leadership.
Let's not pause on a blinky face. So the access to governing body members has changed a lot recently. It used to be like when I was growing up as a witness, I didn't even know who they were. Like if you asked me to name any of them, I wouldn't have been able to name them. And there's zero emphasis put on who these people were. It was just, they were humble people that were leading God's organization behind the scenes, and they were overseeing the publication of the putting out all this spiritual food at the proper time was the phrase, and it still is. But now they've moved to like the video broadcasting for Jehovah's Witnesses, and that has put these people, the governing body, into a much more public spotlight. Still can't talk to them directly. You can't question them. You can't ask them questions. You still, if you call headquarters, you don't get to talk to a governing body member. You talk to a committee or helpers or whoever who will maybe pass along your questions. It's a lot like trying to get to a CEO of a company. You're not going to talk to them. You're going to talk to an executive relationship team or something along those lines.
Another aspect of information control and arguably behavior control is that the members spy and snitch on each other. Again, this does remind me of like an Orwellian type belief system where you better be following the rules and you're going to be a good comrade if you tell on the people that aren't. In fact, you might be rewarded for it. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're having doubts, you should not tell your best friend, because they're loyal to Jehovah and his organization. They'll snitch on you to the elders. You can be ostracized very quickly. So if you're having doubts, you basically keep it to yourself out of fear. And I'm sure a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses feel that way. They do have doubts, but because they're fear-oriented, they do not say it out loud. That's just one example of many. You could be snitched on for a lot of things. Another aspect of information control is the generated propaganda.
There may be sometimes, depending on the people that you associated with, you could kind of gauge whether or not they are the snitching type, or whether or not they would snitch on you, whereas they might snitch on somebody else. And snitching, I just mean like tell the elders. So if you go and tell somebody or say, hey, I don't agree with this beard. I had people that I talked to, and it's like we talked about the beard thing all the time. Like, why can't we wear beards? This is stupid, and we didn't agree. Oh, well, we're not going to do it anyway because, then you're going to get in trouble. But everybody knew like we didn't agree with it, and there was lots of people that didn't agree with it, and that kind of thing was openly talked about. But if you're doubting main teachings, like I don't know if this is really were the governing body really chosen in 1919, the whole 1914 and 607 BCE of the fall of Jerusalem dates that don't match up with history that they teach are real, or is that you don't doubt that in front of people. That's the kind of stuff that would get you in a meeting with elders talking about why you are doubting God's true organization in a heartbeat
that the organization makes for its members. If anybody is somewhat familiar with a lot of Jehovah's Witness beliefs, the images on their magazines and their books is very strong images. And I'll show you an example of this.
And they got in trouble in Sweden recently.
There's a lot of fear propaganda.
Sweden. Maybe
and it's supposed to invoke
the videos that
changes in their behavior so that they stay obedient to the organization. We talked about how they can misquote from sources, and I will give you an example of that here in a few minutes. But the next thing I want to talk about is something that is called confession. With a Jehovah's Witness, one way that they kind of help modify and control your behavior is when you do something wrong. If you sin, you confess your sin to the elders. You come clean. You feel very strongly about this as a Jehovah's Witness. So for an example, I actually had a friend that was in one of these situations. I've had many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses tell me their terrible experiences with this, but one in particular, she had committed a sin that was bad enough that she felt like it needed to be confessed to the elders. This is different than going to, say, like an accountability partner, somebody that would keep you accountable for the things that you're doing. Maybe that's bad, and you pray together and you work with it and through it together. This is different. We'll get into how the witness organization works, but they have something they call a judicial committee, which might be something that would be appropriate if you came and
So judicial committee, to be very specific, is not always a like you could potentially confess to an elder and they go, you know what, it's not that serious, it was in the past, whatever the case might be. It really does depend on what you're confessing to them as to whether or not you get a judicial committee. Judicial committee comes in specifically when they're deciding whether or not you're going to be disfellowshipped or not, or reproved publicly, reproved privately. There's a few different things that you can, or ways that you can be punished. So basically the rundown is privately reproved is basically they talk to you in private, and you might lose privileges in the congregation to do certain things that you were taking care of, like things like holding a microphone during a meeting or passing it out, like when there's times to comment, things like that, or running the sound or setting up the stage or stuff like that. There's little things that people get privileges for, and that can get taken away if you're reproved. And then there's a public reproval, which is basically the same thing, except for they also make an announcement to the entire congregation that so-and-so was publicly reproved. They don't usually go into details about what it is, but typically, I don't know if this is still the case, but they usually would have done a talk or a part in the meeting. So it's usually one of the weekday late night meetings or gatherings, they call them meetings, where they would give a talk on the topic that the person that got publicly reproved had an issue with. So if they give a talk about watching R-rated films, and then they make an announcement that somebody was publicly reproved, it's probably because they were watching R-rated movies, and somebody told, or they felt bad about it and went and told the elders, and then they felt that then they need to publicly reprove them. And then if you do something so bad that you get disfellowshipped, that's the other outcome typically of the judicial community. So it's not always a judicial community if you confess, but it can be depending on what the problem is or what the sin was.
Confessed a terrible sin, and they would need to have a committee get together and decide if you needed to be disfellowshipped or not. But in this case, she's going to the elders to confess what she had done. They're all men, mind you, and they're asking her very personal questions about what she had done, and it's very inappropriate. So a lot of times whenever if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're before these elders especially if you're a woman, you're telling them these things, and it's
psychiatrists and
difficult.
Probably
but because there's such a
help.
strong emphasis on confession, you tell them everything. You come as clean as you can. Why? Because they need to keep track of you as a witness, so it could possibly be used against you later on. Sounds a lot like Scientology and what they do with their methods. Degree, yeah. Part of the reason why this is emphasized is because if a member is reported to have done a wrongdoing, and rather than confess that, they're far more likely to be considered unrepentant and then disfellowshipped for it. So you better come clean right away. I'm going to read some quotes directly from the Watchtower that will solidify this point. Again, there's a lot, but this just solidifies it more. So if doubts, complaints, or apostasy threaten to contaminate you spiritually, cut them away quickly. Get help from the congregation elders. It is certainly not easy to confess to others deeds that one feels ashamed of and to seek forgiveness. It takes inner strength. If he does not do this within a reasonable period of time, concern for the cleanliness of the congregation should move you to report the matter to the elders. Now, I want to make a comment on this real quick.
I'm going to make a comment before she does. So this part here. So if doubts, complaints, or apostasy threaten to contaminate you spiritually, cut them away quickly. Get help from congregation elders. Now, the phrasing of that might not be the same, but the sentiment, I would say, is very common in mainstream Christianity. If you start to doubt, if you start seeing things in the church that you don't like, now this one probably not so much, or if you got apostasy stuff coming up, the doubts and apostasy, I don't know that mainstream Christianity would necessarily call it apostasy so much, but if it's going to hurt you spiritually, or if you're having a problem with somebody in the church, and it's going to hurt you spiritually, cut it away and go to the leadership of the church. Go to an elder, go to a deacon, go to mature Christians in the congregation or the church that you're in. This advice, for the most part, like I said, the phrasing might not be exactly the same, but the sentiment is definitely there in mainstream Christianity. The rest of it, I don't know. It probably depends on the church you're going to, but some churches do have this kind of stuff. Like the go to your brother first, and if he doesn't repent and doesn't do it in a reasonable period of time, then you should report it so that leadership can take care of it. Some churches do that, some don't. so that's not as common.
Now, I want to make a comment on this real quick. I was actually given an example of this by a Jehovah's Witness, a very devout, lifelong Jehovah's Witness, of how they feel like they need to keep out bad association and keep cleanliness within the congregation because they want to associate with good people, with good Jehovah's Witnesses. And the way she put it was that if you have a glass of water and then you have a dropper filled with ink, and you take a drop of that ink and you put it in the water, then the whole water is now contaminated with the ink. And that's how they think of that. If there's one weak Jehovah's Witness, or if there's anybody in there that could contaminate the rest of them, they don't want to associate with them because they're the ink, they're the water, they're the pure ones. And that if they associate with other people, then they're going to be contaminated. That's how they think of that. Think about this for a second. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and you have depression, you're having doubts, whatever it is, you're the ink. And that's just within the congregation. If you're somebody that puts on a facade of joy, or that you're a good Jehovah's Witness, then you're going to be looked at as the water. So it's very black and white in that sense. And I believe personally, this is my opinion, but I think that's why a lot of them do put on a fake facade. A lot of them are not happy, but you have to act happy. You have to, because you're told that Jehovah's people are the happiest people on earth. And if you're not one of the happiest people on earth, then maybe you're weak in mind. Maybe you're not as spiritual as the rest. And so even though majority might feel that way, you'll never know because you don't want to be ostracized. You don't want to be put off. You don't want to be the ink. Okay, so moving on. I have a lot to say about information control, but I am going to quote more quotes from the Watchtower about researching, about studying, because it's downplayed. You don't want to do a lot of heavy research. It's looked down upon because the research has already been done for you. This is a quote from the Watchtower. It says, "We may think of study as hard work, as involving heavy research. But in Jehovah's organization, it is not necessary to spend a lot of time and energy in research, for there are brothers in the organization who are assigned to do that very thing, to help you who do not have so much time for this. These preparing the good materials in the Watchtower and other publications of the society. Take this suggestion. Often the very best and most beneficial studying you do is that done when you read a new Watchtower or Awake, or a new book with the joy of getting the new truths and a fresh view." Now there's a lot more on this, but basically the Watchtower is very open.
They definitely
very open. It's very easy to look at their own words on their website, in their publications, about how research is downplayed. I mean, they'll say yes, and a Jehovah's Witness will say this, that yes, we research,
I'm gonna let
we do this stuff, but it's only research done in Watchtower approved material. You are not allowed to do free independent research. You're allowed to do studying that's given to you only by and approved by the Watchtower organization, which is not a real study at all.
I don't know about it. Well, yeah. Okay, so that's the point I was going to make too. They do definitely encourage studying and research, but it is, as she pointed out, it's in their own publications. You don't go research on jwfacts.com. You don't go researching like scientific literature. If you want to know about evolution, you research the book they published on it and figure out why it's wrong and learn about it from there. You don't go read a biology textbook. If you want to learn about other religions, you study the publication they published about them. You don't go asking people from other religions what they believe. You don't go study their religious text. You study what the Jehovah's Witnesses published about them. So, yeah. They do encourage the studying and research, and they keep you busy with that. They want you to do it all the time, but in their publications.
If you can't look at opposing beliefs, if you're not allowed to do that, there's something wrong with your beliefs then. All right, so to further show this point, I'm going to read another quote from the Watchtower. "Under the guidance of his Holy Spirit and on the basis of his word of truth, Jehovah provides what is needed so that all of God's people may be fitly united in the same mind and in the same line of thought, and remain stabilized in the faith. The faithful and discreet slave, which is the governing body, the leaders of the Jehovah's Witness religion, does not endorse any literature, meetings, or websites that are not produced or organized under its oversight. For those who wish to do extra Bible study and research, we recommend that they explore Insight on the Scriptures, which is a Jehovah's Witness made book. It's made by the Jehovah's Witness religion. And again, as we have gone over, that's the only approved information that you're allowed to research and look into if you're a Jehovah's Witness. A few years ago, I did go to their district convention, and this point is emphasized regularly. You do not go to other websites, read books, or anything that is critical of the organization. You don't do it. I remember the Jehovah's Witness, the man who gave the talk, was very firm. He was very direct. Don't do it. He reminded me of like a really strict authoritarian type parent, where it's just, you don't question this. This is something you must do. All right, now I'm going to give you a real life example of what they do all the time. And I'm going to show you how they do this by showing you some examples of how information control works in the Watchtower. Now, this example I'm going to give is actually from their own Reasoning from the Scriptures book.
Ooh, that's an old book.
It's my dog. He wants attention. Not right now, Max. I'm busy. Anyway, if you're not familiar with this, every Jehovah's Witness that I know of carries this around. And what it reminds me of is kind of like when I worked in a call center, and what you have is kind of like a little script. When somebody calls in, you have the same response, the same answer to the question that they're calling in with. That's kind of what this is. So if you ask a question about, I don't know, the Bible or Armageddon or miracles or whatever, this is in alphabetical order how you respond to them. This is one reason why Jehovah's Witnesses will have almost the same exact answer to any question that's asked, pretty much universally. It's really rare in my opinion and experience that you'll find a Jehovah's Witness that disagrees with one another, because they're taught the same thing in the organization as a whole. Congregations are different from one another, and they do function differently.
I wonder if that
but the beliefs and the doctrines are standard and static.
Look that up.
So if you're asking, in this case, we're going to talk about their belief on the cross. So this is basically their script to you whenever you ask a question. A lot of them have this memorized, believe it or not. This is actually really hard to get a hold of, because this isn't typically something that they don't give this to you. They will not. This is not a standard publication that they give out to the public. But what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to use is from this little booklet that they use, and it's under the questions people would ask about the cross. Now, for those of you that don't know, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that Jesus died on a cross. We will get into more of this later. I know I keep saying this, but I have to be organized with how I go about this whole series. But they believe that Jesus died on a stake. And they look at the cross like it's repulsive and pagan, because that's a unique doctrine to the Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of people ask about that. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you have somebody asking you about the cross, well, just go to the C in your Reasoning from the Scriptures little booklet and give the answer for what it says, like a script. All right, so I'm just going to read this and then we'll go on from there. This is on page 89 underneath the explanation for a cross. And it says, the Imperial Bible Dictionary, which is where they're quoting from. Okay, so they're using the Imperial Bible Dictionary to make their point, acknowledges this saying. The Greek word for cross, stauros, properly signified a stake, an upright pole or piece of paling on which anything might be hung, or which might be used in impaling, fencing in, a piece of ground.
Fun of translating dead languages, right?
This is important.
The only meaning it possibly have.
Even amongst the Romans, the crux, from which our cross is derived, appears to have been originally an upright pole. Now that is where they are getting this information from. So according to the Watchtower publication, they're trying to use the Imperial Bible Dictionary to back up their belief that Jesus died, not on a cross, but on a stake. And the way that they're showing that the rest of Christianity is wrong is by showing this historical quote from the Imperial Bible Dictionary, which appears to say that it was a stake that Jesus died on. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go look at the Imperial Bible Dictionary.
No, don't do
What's
that.
highlighted in yellow is what they use
like
in the reasoning book. What's in purple is what they left out. So let's read it. So remember the ... Let's read this again with the rest of the quote put in. All right. It says the Greek word rendered cross, stauros, properly signified a stake, an upright pole or piece of paling on which anything might be hung, or which might be used in impaling a piece of ground. Remember, this is where they stopped the quote, but let's read it in its context. It says, but a modification was introduced as the dominion and usages of Rome extended themselves through Greek-speaking countries. So what modification was this? Let's keep reading. Even amongst the Romans, the crux from which our cross is derived appears to have been originally an upright pole, comma, they didn't finish the quote. And this always remained the more prominent part. But from the time that it began to be used as an instrument of punishment, a transverse piece of wood was commonly added. Not, however, always even then. And then if you read here on the bottom, it's saying that crucifixion was very common. If they had used the quotation in context, they never would have been able to use that. So they pick and choose bits and pieces of what looks like a scholarly source to make it look to the witness like this is legitimate. Do you see how they did that? And they do this all the time. This is why they're not allowed to look at other information. Yes, they use the Imperial Bible Dictionary, but is that approved by the Watchtower?
So that's an interesting point. In that book, they do list the source from where they got it. I don't remember. I wonder if I can go back to the reasoning. Oh yeah, so this is odd. So they do say in the Imperial Bible Dictionary, edited by so and so, volume 1, page 376. So they even give the source. So witnesses could go look this quote up themselves and see what she just found. But most witnesses won't do that. They trust that, oh, this is the information I need on it. And they won't even know. Like, nowadays, it's probably super easy to go find this online. I would imagine the Imperial Bible Dictionary is probably online. But most witnesses aren't going to do that.
This is why they're not allowed to look at other information. Yes, they use the Imperial Bible Dictionary, but is that approved by the Watchtower? No.
Nope.
The Watchtower approved publication, Reasoning from the Scriptures, is going to use that
Tells you all
in
you
an
need to know
appropriate
about
way.
it.
You're the Jehovah's Witness. We're the governing body. You take the information we give you and don't ask questions. So because they trust the governing body and they trust this because it's from the governing body, they have no need to go look in the Imperial Bible Dictionary to see if that was actually true. It's not, but they're taking it like it is. So when you have people that go and they look at this and say you were to actually try to tell them this, they wouldn't trust you because you're worldly. You're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. You're not spirit. You're not part of the spirit-directed organization. Why would I listen to you? This came directly from the governing body. That's who I trust. So this would never be acceptable. The full quotation would never be acceptable in a Jehovah's Witness publication. They have to edit it to make it fit their theology, to make it look like what they believe is legitimate. Again, this is only one example of thousands. And I'll show you another one right now. So this next one I actually found on my own a long time ago. You can find this if you get Watchtower magazines. You can actually go online as well because they have their jw.org website. And you can look at their Watchtower and Awake magazines. You can also get them directly from the witnesses. And you can do this yourself. You can actually look at this one's an older one. This is a Watchtower magazine. This one's an Awake magazine. You can go through these and purposely look for quotations from scholars or from any resource really, and look at the original source and see if it matches up. A lot of times it doesn't. Now in this particular Watchtower magazine, it was from the May 1st, 2012 Watchtower. This is just one example. I like giving this example because it's my favorite. They quoted a very prominent, well-known Trinitarian scholar. Some of you might know who he is, Ben Witherington III. And I thought, why are they quoting him? So let me read it to you and let me show you
Don't worry about it.
how this works. All right, now just to remind you, this is the Watchtower, May 1st, 2012. This is under the section, Why Were Some Jews Stumbled by the Manner of Jesus' Death? I'm reading the highlighted part. It says, regarding Jesus' manner of death and the culture of those living in the Middle East in the first century, Bible commentator Bill Witherington III says that it was the most shameful way to die in that world. It was not seen as a noble martyrdom of any sort. Witherington further states, people in that world believe that the manner of your death most revealed your character. Okay, now at first glance, people are like, okay, well, what's the problem? The problem is this. Look at this again. I want to make sure that people understand how this is done and how subtle it is. Okay, remember, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe Jesus died on a cross. He died on a stake. So they're going to give information to back up the fact that they believe that Jesus died on a stake. All right, so this is implied to the witness regarding Jesus's manner of death. Okay, his manner of death to a Jehovah's Witness is that he died on a stake. All right, now to back up Jesus dying on a stake, to support that, they're going to quote Ben Witherington. Commentator Ben Witherington III says that it, dying on a stake, was the most shameful way to die in that world. Now, here's the thing. If you would go read the actual article that they're quoting from, that's not what it says. In its full context, it says this. The real sticking point for Jesus's followers is that the culture of the Middle East at that time, and still today, was an honor and shame culture. And crucifixion was the most shameful way to die in that world. It was not seen as a noble martyrdom of any sort. Do you guys see how they purposely left out the word crucifixion and quoted only part of what Witherington was saying? This is manipulation of information. They're taking it and making it seem like a scholar, like Ben Witherington, who's a Trinitarian, he's a Christian, is saying that Jesus died on a stake. They're implying that. Now, nobody would really catch that unless you actually went and saw these inconsistencies. Ben Witherington is saying crucifixion was the most shameful way to die. But they're taking his quote, kind of cutting it out, taping it back up, and making it look like dying on a stake was the most shameful way to die. Do you see how this works? You guys understand? They do this all the time. This is all over their publications. I can look in pretty much anything they make, and I will find stuff like this over and over again. Again, this is why they do not want them looking at other things. They can control their information, and therefore you control what they believe. Also, by the way, I don't know if, again, a lot of people watching.
So I don't know. It is definitely a way to control the information, but the misquote. So they're doing the false authority or false appeal to authority, the fallacious kind. So they're quoting authoritative sources, but misquoting them to give their own message more authority. So it is definitely a form of information control, and it gives the witness a sense of this is backed up, and I don't need to necessarily go look. They've already quoted it, and that's a fairly common thing. Like, if you see quotation, unless you want to go, I'm interested in this topic, I want to go research it more, I want to find out the details behind it, then you might go look up the source. But witnesses are not encouraged in any way to do that. They are assuming that whatever the quote is quoted correctly. And if you try and point out to them, like, a witness isn't going to point out to another witness, oh, this was quoted out of context because of what she was talking about earlier, the snitching thing. Like, if I go tell brother or sister so-and-so, hey, I looked up this quote and it doesn't, like, if you read it in context, it says the opposite of what the Watchtower was trying to quote it as supporting, they're going to go tell an elder and say, hey, this guy over here is doubting. He's saying that the Watchtower is not true, and he's trying to include me in on this, or it's a snitching thing. So you're not going to question. So you're not going to look up. There's no motivation for the witness to look up the quotes. And that, I would definitely agree with her on. It is definitely information control in that respect. But I just want to point out that the witness has zero motivation to go look up those quotes in most cases.
We know a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses' beliefs. We will, again, get into this later. Oh, I sound like a broken record. I'm sorry. But Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is not God. They think that the Trinity is a pagan, evil belief. So for them to quote somebody that is a Trinitarian and believes, that Jesus died on a cross, is very telling. That they will basically take from any source to make it appear
that agree with them
as if their beliefs are valid. And this is from the governing body. Okay, they're the ones who make the decision. So I'm just pointing that out because the reason why Ben Witherington being a Trinitarian is important is because they have such strong beliefs against Trinitarianism. All right, a few more things on information control, then we'll move on to thought control, but this is important to mention. Jehovah's Witnesses, the organization, discourages higher education. Now, this kind of couples together with freedom of information in a way, because you want to be able to have freedom to research anything. So for a Jehovah's Witness...
So they do discourage higher education for people who are in the organization, but they have no problem using people that have higher education that became witnesses as lawyers or other high-skilled labor at headquarters. They got lots of lawyers. You can't really be a lawyer without going to higher education. They got people running their computer systems and infrastructure. I'm sure some of the people in media production have gone to school, or at least the equivalent of higher education, to get those skills, and they have no problem utilizing the skills that come from it. But they do definitely discourage it en masse for the rank and file follower.
If you are researching the Jehovah's Witnesses, you're basically studying Watchtower material, especially if you've grown up in the religion. So you can't just freely go research your religion or anything that's not approved by God's channel of communication, the governing body, the Watchtower organization.
And they know that too.
The truth. So when they discourage
college is
looking at any other information that is approved by them, they also are very vocal about discouraging. It's an important, very intentional word I'm using, discouraging higher education, which means a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses don't go to college. They don't pursue a higher education. Some do, but that is rare. I would say that a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses would say that it's a personal decision, which I guess it is. I suppose it is. And that is true to an extent.
Yeah.
But the governing body is very open about not pursuing a higher education.
Though. Like,
there's a few reasons for this. One, why would you pursue a higher education when Armageddon is right around the corner? Why would you waste your time getting educated in worldly things when you could be preaching the kingdom message? That's what you need to be spending your time on doing. So there's that. The other reason why I see that they discourage higher education is that it, and especially in the West, it promotes critical thinking. All right. So
I just said that.
In different cultures, it's different in different cultures. But here in the West, we're very big about critical thinking. We want to know all the facts. We want to research. We can ask questions of our superiors, of our pastors, of our authority figures in the quest of just gathering information. That's done because we're thinking. All right. Now, to the Jehovah's Witness, the thinking is already basically done for them. So they don't have a need or desire to think critically about what they believe, because then that would cause them to question God's channel of communication. So I've also noticed a correlation between Jehovah's Witnesses who go to college,
more likely to go
who do
look
get
up
higher
those
education,
quotes.
and ones that don't. In my personal endeavors in ministry and talking to them, is they do think critically. They're actually very easy to talk to compared to other Jehovah's Witnesses. I think, in my opinion, that if you find a Jehovah's Witness who is going to college and they are pursuing a higher education, you got yourself a thinker. You got somebody who would be a potential good person to talk to, and maybe
probably on their way out.
They will listen to you and might actually research the organization and come to Christ. Now, to show this and to just give a quote, and again, this is something that they're pretty vocal about, the governing body and Jehovah's Witnesses in general, but here's a quote from them from the 2008 Watchtower. It says, "What though of higher education received in a college or university? This is widely viewed as vital to success, yet many who pursue such education end up with their minds filled with harmful propaganda." That's ironic, don't you think? "Such education wastes valuable youthful years that could best be used in Jehovah's service. Perhaps it is not surprising that in lands where many have received such an education, belief in God is at an all-time low." Which is not really true. I'm not sure where they're getting that statistic from. "Rather than looking to the advanced educational systems of this world for security, a Christian trusts in Jehovah." Which again, translated, means you trust in the organization. You trust in Jehovah's organization. Okay, so moving on to thought control. You might be thinking, okay, how do you control somebody's thoughts? But I'm sure...
I want to make another quick comment on that. So they will say it's... A lot of people view it as success to go to college, or it's required for success, but they reframe success as not. It does. You're not trying to get material things. You're not trying to make a better life. You're not trying to be sustainable here, because, like you said earlier, Armageddon's just around the corner. This world is coming to an end. There's no reason to store up treasures here that are going to be gone. But they've been saying that for decades. So. That's the tactic. They compare. Oh, well, people say that this is success, but true success is preaching and being part of God's kingdom.
By now, you can kind of understand how in controlling somebody's environment and through fear and manipulation, how something like this could happen. But thought control relates to basically forcing a belief that the group alone teaches the truth. The doctrines of the leaders cannot be questioned, and alternative viewpoints are forbidden. So to go over a few examples of what I mean by this, and again, this is all in Stephen Hassan's book, jwfacts.com is a great resource on this. But basically, you have a need to internalize the group's doctrine as the truth. So everything else is false. It's very...
And I want to point out again, this, at least, I don't even want to say this is to a lesser extent on this one. This is also true of mainstream Christianity. You're internalizing the teachings of Christianity as the truth. Hindus are wrong. Islam is wrong. Buddhism is wrong. Atheism is wrong. All these other groups, they're all wrong. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. You've internalized this as the truth, the Bible. So all we've done is exchange what the authority is. The witnesses just add an extra layer. They still think it's the Bible, but they're layering on the governing body's interpretation of the Bible. The governing body is being now directed in some way by God to tell you what the Bible actually says. Everybody that disagrees with the governing body's interpretation of the Bible is the outgroup. But Christianity does the same exact thing. It's just they don't have this governing body necessarily. It's the Bible is the truth, and you internalize that. So everything she just said about the witnesses is true of mainstream Christianity as well.
Very black and white, which is a mind control technique. It's us versus them. There is no gray area. If you're not with us, you're against us, and you are the enemy. If you think
That's
differently,
true of
or
Christianity.
if you are against what's going on here in this organization, then you're the
If you're not going to heaven, you're going to hell. If you're not saved, or if you're saved, you're not saved. If you're not saved, then you're not saved. That's black and white. You're either saved or you're not. It's the same.
enemy. And there's also this use of what's called loaded language. It's kind of like having their own language within the organization. Throughout this video, I've been
This
trying to be
part's
really
important
careful with the
for
words that I'm using,
talking to
because some people may not
witnesses.
understand that when a Jehovah's Witness uses a word, it means something different to them than it does to us.
Yes.
So like a word for them would
This is the
be
tricky part.
worldly. All right. Worldly to us would be something very different to a Jehovah's Witness. The new system, paradise, earth, the faithful and discreet slave, the truth. They have all these different words that have different meanings to them. To us, it's grace. To them, it's undeserved kindness. And to us, it's faith. To them, it's exercising faith. And we'll go over a little bit more of that as we move on. But there's something with loaded language called thought-stopping cliches. Now, some of you might know what that means, but it can be something that's said to the witness that immediately can shut down their train of thought because of the disdain they have for what you just said. So I'll get a little bit more into loaded language and how that all works. But first, I want to go back to the black and white thinking, the us versus them. Again, to drive this point home, they believe that if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you basically don't worship God. You worship a false God. So
Christians
to them,
believe
somebody
you're
like
not
me,
saved,
I'm
you're not a
basically
true
worshiping
Christian,
Satan because
you're not
I
worshiping
say I'm a
God.
Christian, I'm a born again Christian, and I'm a Trinitarian, and I'm not part of Jehovah's organization. To them, that's me against the organization. I'm part of Satan's system
Trinitarian
in their
Christians say
eyes.
the
Now, to
same
give
thing
examples of
about
this
witnesses?
from the actual Watchtower, here are
It's
some
just
more
flipped.
quotes. If we stop actively supporting Jehovah's work, then we start following Satan. There is no middle ground. Either you are serving Jehovah God or Satan the devil. Regardless of your answer, if you follow the unrighteous ways of the world, you
You're a
cannot be
little more
serving
blatant
the
about
true
it,
God,
maybe,
Jehovah.
than some Christians
The
might
next
be.
quote, are you so
But
different
it's
from
the
the
same.
majority of mankind that you can say that they are serving the devil, but that you are serving the true God? There is a people who are that different, and everyone knows they are different. In no part of the world, they are the Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on being unified. They always say that they are different and unified and different from any other religion in Christendom. They call it Christendom, which is true. I actually commend them for that. I think that the Jehovah's Witnesses do a very good job of staying unified. However, in the quest to stay unified, they distinguish disagreement. If you disagree with them, you're looked at as the enemy. So it's like, yay, we're being unified and nobody else is as unified as us Jehovah's Witnesses. Yay, we must be the true religion. But they don't realize that they're forced to stay unified. It's forced upon them because if they disagree, then they're part of Satan's
That's an
system.
interesting
Now, I
angle
also
to
want to
take.
touch on something they call discouragement of discussion since we're on this topic. There's a lot to say about this, but one thing I want to point out is that with the Watchtower, with people who are familiar with the Watchtower, with any of their publications, they will say that they follow the Bible, that everything that they believe is from the Bible.
They do it.
And that's half true, because what it is, and I always say this, it's the Bible plus. So if you have the Bible,
it's the Bible.
You cannot, according to the governing body and the organization, you cannot understand the Bible
That's all it is.
without the organization. You have to have the organization interpret the Bible for you. Now tell me that they don't just have all the control over what the Bible means then. So what they'll say and what they'll do is they'll have something that they'll say, some sort of doctrinal statement about how Jesus isn't God, or...
But how is this different than the Christian who is a Trinitarian or has their beliefs on, like, they're not relying on necessarily on this governing body or these other people to interpret it, but they kind of are. So they're taking the traditional view or the view of their church. I mean, you might run into some Christians who will say, oh, I read the Bible and I came to this conclusion without any outside influence. But I have a hard time believing that, especially in the U.S., that somebody just randomly picked up a Bible, never heard of Christianity before, read it, and came to the conclusion of mainstream Christianity is right. And then they met somebody in mainstream Christianity and go, wow, I believe everything you do. No, that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So the Trinitarian is in the same position that she's saying that the witnesses are. You've got the governing body telling Jehovah's Witnesses what the Bible says. And you don't have that same power dynamic or the same level of intensity per se, but you do have tradition or governing influences that, and the same mindset that the Trinitarian has the truth and the witness isn't a true Christian because they don't believe the right things. They don't have the correct interpretation of the Bible. It's the same mentality flipped. The witness would say the Trinitarian's not a true Christian because they believe in the Trinity, and that's the wrong interpretation according to the governing body. The Trinitarian will say the same thing about the witness, that the witness isn't a true Christian because they don't believe in the Trinity, and the governing body has it wrong.
Blood transfusions are not godly, or whatever the case may be. What they'll do is they'll say their doctrine that's unique to the Watchtower, and then boom, just plug in a verse, like a reference to a verse. And the witness just automatically thinks, oh, well, there's my biblical proof for what they're saying. And a witness will say, some of them will say, yes, I go back and I read it and it makes perfect sense. But when you have those goggles on, it's really hard because you're not supposed to question your resource that you even got it from. You're basically taught how to interpret that scripture. You're not taught what the scripture says. You're taught how to
interpret. No
interpret.
pausing on blinky faces. Okay. The same is true of the Trinitarian, the mainstream Christian. If you point them to like a New Testament scholar that disagrees with their literal interpretation of a verse, or Hebrew Bible scholar that disagrees with Moses being a real person, or Abraham probably wasn't a real person, and these traditions, these texts that we have come from an oral tradition of the ancient Hebrew culture at the time, and these stories are mythologized and they're not historical narrative and they're embellished retellings to provide a origin story of their culture and how they got to where they are, but they weren't intended to ever be historical narrative. When you present a Christian with those alternative views of the Bible, they'll reject it much the same way that a witness will reject you trying to tell them that blood transfusions are fine. Not for the same reasons per se, but they're not going to agree with this alternate interpretation of the Bible, this alternate viewpoint.
Interpret it through the eyes of the Watchtower. So, eisegesis.
Oh, and I was going to say, she had mentioned goggles, when they have the goggles on. When the Christian has the goggles of biblical literalism, they're not going to accept critical scholarship of the Bible and trying to take it as text from an ancient culture in an ancient time, trying to understand it as a book, not assuming that it is an inspired text from God, but humans trying to relay experiences that they had with something that they may have viewed as God.
Exegesis. That's basically what they're doing. It's eisegesis. It's bad subjective viewing of the scriptures. They're controlling what the scriptures actually say, discouraging free, independent reading of the Bible, because that's bad. It needs to be interpreted through the Watchtower. Now, another example of this that I kind of want to demonstrate is
It's not different
how
than
the Jehovah's Witnesses
having to be
see the
interpreted
material given to them
literal.
from the Watchtower compared to the actual Bible. And this is my own personal experience. This is my own personal interpretation of this, but it's also very obvious as well. You can see this if you used to be a Jehovah's Witness or if you're studying with them or have done a lot of research. But when I was with my Jehovah's Witnesses a long time ago, we would do our weekly Bible studies. It's really a Watchtower publication alongside the Bible. And one thing I noticed is that whenever we were doing our Bible studies, they go kind of like by an order of certain things that you're supposed to go over. And I noticed her little booklet that she was using, which was this one at the time. It was, what does the Bible really teach? They have updated it since then. But this is what they go over. This is what they'll give you. They would give you back then anyway, at the door. That would give you the information on Jehovah's Witness theology. Now,
I
her
think
Bible
that's still
Teach
the
book,
current
which is what they
one.
call it. They call it the Bible Teach book. At least back then they did. Was tattered and worn, and I mean, you could see the edges of the publication was just,
I did see a
it was
new one
coming
in the
off.
app. It was like, what
And her
can we
Bible
learn
was
from the
crisp
Bible
and
or something
clean.
like that?
And I thought that was a very telling nonverbal statement of how Jehovah's Witnesses view their publications. Their Bible is
true.
an aid,
That's a good
but they
point.
can't understand it without the Watchtower. So just kind of driving that
What
point
does the Bible
home,
teach?
that
What
the
can
view
the
of
Bible teach
the
us?
Bible
That was
compared to the
2013
publications,
though.
they'll say that they
Anything
read the
more
Bible,
recent?
and they will say that everything that they believe is in the Bible, but it's only in the Bible because it has been interpreted into the Bible
I don't
by
think they have a
them.
newer book than that
And
one.
they arguably would know more about their
That
own
one
doctrine
came
than
out
they
in
would about the Bible. So
2014.
that's all relevant because you can't discuss the Bible, all right? You know how like you can just get together and do an independent Bible study with just the Bible? Jehovah's Witnesses can't do that. A Bible study to them is always accompanied with Watchtower material because they can't understand the Bible on their own. Now I'm going to read a quote from a man named Ray Franz. Ray Franz, by the way, this is really important to know. He wrote this book, Crisis of Conscience. He wrote another book called In Search of Christian Freedom as well. I haven't read that one, but I do own this one. And now Ray Franz is a very pivotal figure in the Jehovah's Witness history. He was on the governing body and left
Get him out of
the
here.
governing body, and he wrote a book about why. He wrote 2 books about why, and he was actually very respectful and I would say kind in how he basically outed them. And it's a very interesting book. I think it's out of print, unfortunately, so it's actually hard to get a hold of. But if you really want to understand the core doctrines and the core problems with what goes on in the Watchtower, this is a good book to get. But I'm going to read a quote from him that kind of segues into how they discourage free discussion. It's and again, this is quoted in Search of Christian Freedom. To this day, in all countries, any persons among Jehovah's Witnesses who find they cannot conscientiously support fully the organization's teachings or practices live in a climate of fear, feeling they must constantly be on guard as to what they say, what they do, what they read, with whom they associate, from whom they receive letters, not feeling any sense of freedom, even when among personal friends or close relatives, if these are also witnesses. As stated in my personal experience, I have had people phone who were afraid to give their name or who felt it necessary to use a fictitious name, some who even felt it necessary to take out a special post office to be able to correspond without danger of their correspondence with me or other former witnesses being discovered. They face a form of hostage situation produced by the organization's authority. The only way to avoid this is to meet the terms the organization lays down. So that is a very telling quote from somebody who has been on the inside. You don't want people to know that you're having doubts. You can't just discuss things openly. If I'm having doubts or having some sort of spiritual struggle or whatever, I can pretty much openly discuss those things, at least I would hope so, within my community of Christian friends. Now, some people do discourage that, and that's not just true for the Jehovah's Witnesses, unfortunately, but in this case, it's a paramount discouragement. I don't know how many people have been to a Kingdom Hall, but what they do is they'll have their Watchtower study. They'll have the one that they give you, by the way, is different than the one that they receive as witnesses. There's a study edition, and in the study edition, they get it every week, and they do their homework. It's like homework for life is what they're doing. They'll have the Watchtower study edition, and they'll study it the week before. And when they go to the Kingdom Hall on Sunday, they are expected to know what's in their study edition, what's in their Watchtower magazine. And they have a question answer session. Now, you would think that this would be like a free conversation, but it's not. It's another way of indoctrination, as the way I see it, because you're reading what's in the study edition, and then they have questions on the bottom that are directly found right back up in the paragraph or what you just read. There is no encouragement of giving a answer that's from your mind, a thought-provoking response. You are expected to respond how your study tells you to respond. If you don't, then you're basically not going to be called on as much, or you could be publicly reproved in front of the congregation. You do, and you answer and do as the study tells you to do. So there is no free discussion of that. There is no, hey, sister so-and-so, do you want to come over to my house and we'll go over even the latest Watchtower and do your own independent personal study together with somebody else? That's discouraged. And I bet you can tell and know why is because if you were to do something like that, that promotes free, independent thinking, which is discouraged by the Watchtower. Now, I will say, and I mentioned this before, that not every congregation is as strict as another, but for the most part, the general understanding of all Jehovah's Witnesses is you don't question the Watchtower on any level. You might be thinking, do they really discourage independent thinking? I applaud your critical thinking and asking that question. But yes, they do. This is easily researchable. You can go to their website, you can look at their publications. Jehovah's Witnesses that I've met with are actually very open about this. It's almost like they're proud of it. No, we don't independently think. That's demonic. That's not, that's worldly. We have the truth. So here are some quotes just to kind of drive this point home. I love quotes. I think quotes are very, very telling because you're looking directly at the religion and just reading it for what they have to say. Okay, the first one is from Watchtower, 1983. Avoid questioning the counsel that is provided by God's visible organization. Some will point out that the organization has had to make some adjustments before, and so they argue. This shows that we have to make up our own mind on what to believe. This is independent thinking. Why is it so dangerous? The next one's from Watchtower 2001. First, since oneness is to be observed, and they mean oneness as far as unity, a mature Christian must be in unity and full harmony with fellow believers as far as faith and knowledge are concerned. He does not advocate or insist on personal opinions or harbor private ideas when it comes to Bible understanding. The next one is beware of those who try to put forward their own contrary opinions. That's Watchtower 1986. And there's more just to drive the point home, to make the point. From time to time, there have arisen from among the ranks of Jehovah's people those who, like the original Satan, have adopted an independent, fault-finding attitude. They say that it is sufficient to read the Bible exclusively, either alone or in small groups at home. But, strangely, through such Bible reading, they have reverted right back to the apostate doctrines that commentaries by Christendom's clergy were teaching, which means they basically became...
That quote was always, is a common one among ex-Christian or ex-JWs that became Christian, and that was a good big one for me when I transitioned from witness to mainstream Christian. Oh, see, they even admit if you just read the Bible alone, you'll revert to a Christian. And that, yeah, it is a very telling quote. The worry that, oh well, if you don't have our interpretation and our real understanding of it, then you won't believe what we want you to believe, which is it is an odd thing for them to have said. And it's strange that you can, even as a witness, you can read that and not realize what it's saying.
Trinitarians and born-again Christian. That's what independent Bible reading does. It gets you back to the actual doctrines of the Bible. No wonder they want to keep that away from it. Anyway, more on that later. Two more quotes. To turn away from Jehovah and his organization, to spurn the direction of the faithful and discreet slave, and to rely simply on personal Bible reading and interpretation is to become like a solitary tree in a parched land. That's Watchtower 1985. All right, last one is avoid independent thinking. How is such independent thinking manifested? A common way is by questioning the counsel that is provided by God's visible organization. That's Watchtower 1983. Now, if that's not the clearest example of what I'm trying to say, I don't know what is. They are very open and honest about not questioning and not thinking for yourself. So forbidding questioning and discouraging research is a very powerful mind control tool. Really, so I'm going to move on and talk a little bit more about loaded language before we talk about emotional control, because this is important if you want to learn how you sound to a Jehovah's Witness when you say certain things. Now, there's a very specific example I'm going to use to make this point, but
this should be interesting.
A while ago,
see what she has to say here.
I had a really bad experience with a red chili burrito. I live in New Mexico. We love red and green chili out here. It's part of the culture. But this particular experience was very unpleasant. After this experience, I no longer looked at red chili the same way. I looked at it and I got sick. I'm sure you guys can actually really relate to this. Have you ever had a bad experience with a food or drink or anything like that, where even if you see it again or smell it, or it's just in your presence, you're just, like it makes you kind of sick. It brings back all those memories, those horrible memories of, you know, what it did to you. And so you have a repulsion for it. All right. So in my case, every time that I had any sort of inkling of red chili being in my food, it made me almost physically ill. I couldn't take it. So for many years, I could not eat red chili. Thankfully, for the most part, I am, you know, past that aversion, but it's a very, very strong repulsion you have because of that experience you had.
Yep.
Now, I use that example because this is what happens in a sense, in an emotional sense, when we say certain things to the Jehovah's Witness. So what I mean by that is that it's a really common form of thought control that high control groups have to have loaded language. And what that is that terms
Right.
that are unique to that organization in meaning and in use. And we talked a little bit about this before, that to a Jehovah's Witness, different words mean different things. They have their own language. And if you don't understand the meaning of that language, you might misuse it, or they might hear something different than what you're saying. The other part of it is what I call the red chili effect. So you have to understand how you sound to a Jehovah's Witness when you're saying certain things. So to them, when you say, I'm a born again Christian, to them, that's like a red chili effect. Because they're taught to hate certain things that you believe in. When you talk about Jesus being God, it shuts down the point that you're trying to make and discredits you right away. Right when you start talking about the deity of Jesus or hell or the immortal soul or things that are, you know, typical Christian beliefs, they immediately red chili affect you because they're taught to hate the Trinity. They are taught to hate apostates or anything that talks against the religion. It shuts down everything mentally when they hear those things. So in this effect, in this way,
the enemy,
language that we use can go against our purposes when speaking to a Jehovah's Witness. And I believe it's in the next series or in the next video I want to get into on how to witness to them. We'll talk more about this as well, about what not to say, what to say, things like that I personally find to be effective and what's ineffective in my experience. All right, moving on to the E in the BITE model, it's for emotional control. So emotional control includes the use of fear and guilt, and it places the blame upon the individuals in the organization. However, all of this also works with toxic relationships. Mind control tactics are actually used in toxic relationships as well. And I kind of use the relationship that Jehovah's Witnesses have with the Watchtower as like a toxic relationship. They stay for the wrong reasons. I've had people ask, like, why do Jehovah's Witnesses stay in this religion if they have this experience?
So before we go too much further, it's not a terrible face to pause on. So you'll hear the argument against Christianity, mainstream Christianity, in much the same way that I'm assuming she's about ready to argue against Jehovah's Witnesses. In that, this toxic relationship, and I'm sure you probably heard it a lot, that God is like an abusive relationship. Worship me, believe in me, I love you, it's the perfect love, or you're gonna go to hell. Now there's all kinds of retorts to that and everything else, but I'm curious to see how close to those types of arguments that non-believers will throw at Christians that she's going to use against witnesses. That's what I'm looking for in this segment, to see how close does she get to those arguments.
And the example that I give is, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, is that either you have been in a toxic relationship or know somebody who has been or is in a very unhealthy toxic relationship. Why do they stay? Why did you stay? That dynamic, that unhealthy dynamic, is why they stayed and why you stayed. It's a manipulation. It's a very unhealthy relationship. You stay out of fear, you stay out of guilt. And if you try to leave, how dare you? Who's going to love you now? I'm the truth. The organization has the truth. We have the truth. How dare you leave the truth? And they put this shame and fear and guilt on the witness trying to leave. They take no responsibility. I'm sure a lot of people can understand that example, unfortunately. Now, another direct example I'm going to give that is actually unique to the Jehovah's Witnesses is the year 1975. To most people, that doesn't mean much, but to people that know a little bit about Jehovah's Witness background and doctrine, or if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness that actually lived back then, you know exactly what I'm referring to. There was a huge prophecy blunder on the part of the Watchtower in 1975. They basically predicted that Armageddon was going to come in 1975, and very strongly implied in their publications that that was exactly what was going to happen. And the witnesses had every reason to believe that Armageddon was going to come in 1975. The Watchtower told them to sell their homes. The Watchtower told them to stop having kids, get out of college. Armageddon's coming. What are you doing? What are you thinking? Let's go out and do the theocratic work. And that's what they were highly encouraged to do. Now, 1975 came and went with no Armageddon. And lots of witnesses were very disillusioned by this. And they're like, what gives? You guys said that Armageddon's coming and it didn't come.
Yep.
And you know what the Watchtower did? They blamed it on the witnesses. They said, this was your fault. You misunderstood us. We never said that. We never actually meant that. It's your fault that you thought that. So it's not our fault. That basically is manipulation. That's emotional manipulation. So instead of taking responsibility for it, they swept it under the rug and moved on. And a lot of witnesses, because they trusted that they're under this mind control, went along with them. Thankfully, a lot of witnesses actually left after that. Steve Hassan in his book points out the excessive use of fear in emotional control. Fear. If you want people to believe what you're saying and go along with what you're saying and doing, get them very, very afraid. There's fear of independent thinking, fear of the outside world, fear of enemies, fear of losing one's salvation, fear of leaving the group or being shunned by people. Then there's fear of disapproval. The common theme is
Fear of hell?
Be afraid. Jehovah's Witnesses live in a constant mind frame of fear. That is their main motivator. And the Watchtower knows it. He goes on to point out something called phobia indoctrination. And this is basically indoctrinating irrational fears about ever leaving the group or even questioning the leader's authority. So the person under mind control cannot possibly visualize an outcome that leaves them without the organization. So you cannot have happiness and completeness outside of this organization. Terrible consequences will take place if you leave. You'll be shunned. You might die at Armageddon, which is a huge fear for a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. And some people liken them to like a doomsday cult because they do believe that Armageddon is going to come any day. Are they good enough to survive Armageddon? This is kind of their eschatology. We'll break it down more in later videos, but they believe that Armageddon's going to come.
Different.
At the end of the world is going to come at any point, and they are afraid that they're going to die in Armageddon. They also believe that it's a possibility that they can become demon possessed. They are very afraid of Satan. They're very afraid of demons. Now, for most Christians, we don't really have a fear so much of those kinds of things because we believe God's more powerful, not to a Jehovah's Witness. A Jehovah's Witness looks at Satan like he's very powerful and that he can pounce on them. So when you're talking to them and maybe you are getting their wheels turning, that's a very difficult thing for a Jehovah's Witness to accept and do because they have so much to overcome.
That is a good point that I don't think I thought a lot about as a witness, is that, and I didn't think about that deconverting or converting from witness to Christian. And I'm glad she pointed that out. The witnesses do assign probably a lot more power to Satan or the devil than your mainstream Christian would. In that, but even that though is kind of odd because like God's more powerful than Satan, but somehow Satan still has power over, Satan has power over us to influence us, depending on the Christian you talk to. But witnesses definitely put probably a more heavy emphasis on that the devil or Satan is there. Basically, he's fighting to take as many people with him because he knows he's going to get destroyed. So he wants to take as many people with him, which is a weird motivation. Like, I'm going to go down, I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. I don't quite understand. Looking back on it now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a actual motivation. It was just kind of the story that was told as a witness.
Entertain what you're saying. I actually have a story about this. I had a Jehovah's Witness friend who was kind of like how it was described in the Ray Franz quote from above. She was kind of incognito, undercover, questioning Jehovah's Witness. Nobody can know.
Very common.
And we were friends online, and I was helping her. And she told me that she was having a lot of difficulty visiting websites. That she knew the organization was wrong. She knew that God was not in control of this organization, but the locks were still on. And when she tried to go to these websites like JW Facts or forjehovah.org or all these other wonderful websites and ministries out here that help Jehovah's Witnesses, she said that when she tried to go and read this stuff, she got physically ill. She got sick. It was really hard for her to overcome the control that they had over her mind in this emotional realm. She felt like she was going to be demonized. She felt like Satan was going to take control of her. She felt like she was in a complete realm of fear. And that is hard to overcome. She was very, very brave. So kind of keep in mind as you're talking to them that the red chili effect can happen to even thinking Jehovah's Witnesses or witnesses that are trying to leave. Another phobia indoctrination is the fear of being shunned, that you're going to be rejected by your friends and family to the extreme. They don't even look at you. You are basically dead to them. And to them, there's never a good enough reason to leave. There's never a legitimate reason to question the organization. From the group's perspective, from the organization's perspective, people who leave are weak, they're undisciplined, they're worldly, they're unspiritual, they're demonic, They're brainwashed. They're seduced by money, sin, some other sensual experience that they want to have that the religion doesn't give them. They're just sinners. So there's no reason in their mind why would you want to leave the truth. Another thing that this kind of reminds me of is Stockholm syndrome. I know that a lot of people might know what that is, other people may not, but it's basically when people that are in an abusive situation are bonded basically with their captors. So for Jehovah's Witnesses, they're kept captive. And if you're a Christian, you understand really who they're being kept captive by. It's not just the watchtower. This is a spiritual captivity. All right. And in this sense, in a human sense, they have this really unhealthy adoration and love for the watchtower that keeps them captive. That it kind of reminds me of that, is they love their abusers. So moving on, we talked about fear before and how that's a very strong tool that the watch.
Okay, so that's part of the arguments I was talking about earlier with the non-believer saying that God is like an abusive, or it's like you're in an abusive relationship or a toxic relationship with God. Like, you have to believe in me. I'm going to give you everything. I love you. Don't leave me. You leave God, you go to hell. And so some Christians will twist, or not twist, I shouldn't say twist, but some Christians will frame that as, well, he's not sending you to hell. You're choosing to go to hell. He's allowing you not to be in a relationship with him. But it's not that simple. It is like a toxic relationship. Like, if you leave me, you're going to be miserable. When that's not true in the toxic relationship, when you leave it, you're not necessarily going to be miserable. You may find support and help and have better time. And the witnesses, she is right. They do act like that. And they do say, you leave, you're going to be miserable, you're going to be destroyed in Armageddon, your family's going to shun you, bad things are going to happen when you leave the witnesses. But it's something that they are still doing to you, not because of the reasons that they give. And it's the same argument can apply to Christianity and God. So that I just want to point out that the argument she's making here applies equally to that whole argument that God's like a toxic relationship or a toxic partner.
Tower uses to control its members. Fear is really what the Jehovah's Witness organization uses to control its members and keep them doing what they're required to do. So they'll emphasize like love and joy in the new system, Paradise Earth. But the issue is that it's an equally as strong emphasis on fear God, of worldly people, of Armageddon, of disobeying the organization that's being placed on the witness. The Jehovah's Witness, for the most part, has a fear of Armageddon. Now they'll say they look forward to it because Armageddon means that, Paradise Earth is going to be ushered in, yada, yada. But for the most part, I'm going to show you guys some images, propaganda images that are used in Jehovah's Witness publications to show what will happen at Armageddon. Now tell me, if you were a child seeing this would creep you out. This creeps me out as an adult, and this is a very powerful tool that's used by the Watchtower to control their followers. I know many former witnesses that do not even think their religion is the truth, but they hold a very incredible fear of being killed at Armageddon by God because it's been instilled in them since childhood. Now, something to notice in each one of these images is who are the happy, lucky Jehovah's Witnesses that get to walk away from Armageddon. They're the obedient Jehovah's Witnesses. So to not get into too much of it, the basic understanding and belief of Jehovah's Witnesses is that when Armageddon comes, only the faithful Jehovah's Witnesses are going to survive Armageddon. So you want to be one of those faithful Jehovah's Witnesses. Everything else, all the worldly things, including everybody on earth except the Jehovah's Witnesses, will be destroyed at Armageddon. So you want to be one of these happy, faithful Jehovah's Witnesses walking away from this hellfire, basically. And it's ironic for them not believing in hell. This looks a lot like hell. It's very powerful propaganda used to keep the Jehovah's Witness in line. Now, just to kind of drive this fear home, you guys, because I think a lot of people watching may not understand the plight of the Jehovah's Witness or the ex-Jehovah's Witness who leaves. I know Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, that still have nightmares about Armageddon. They'll wake up in like a panic if there's a thunderstorm or if they hear a loud noise. They think Armageddon's coming. Now they know the Watchtower, they know it's not true. We know it's not true. But the locks that stay on are real. And it takes a lot of deprogramming. It takes a lot of time to take the watchtower out of the witness, if you will. That just because they left doesn't mean that they automatically just, leave that behind. It's
I do think
the worst kind of mind control. That's why it's called mind control. It doesn't just go away right away. So
really
even witnesses that have been out for a long time still have issues with this particular fear. The next fear that I'm going to emphasize is the fear of being disfellowshipped. Now, this is a quote from the Watchtower. One of many talking about this. We must hate the disfellowshipped person in the truest sense, which is to regard with extreme active aversion, to consider them as loathsome, odious, filthy, to detest. Remember earlier how we were talking about the water and the ink? If you're disfellowshipped from Jehovah's organization, you are looked at as a big bottle of ink. Disfellowshipping is quote. I think when a Jehovah's Witness gets disfellowshipped, not only are you going to die at Armageddon,
as a loving
to a Jehovah's Witness, you are for sure. If Armageddon comes, you're going to die. So they have that fear. And then they're shunned. Now, when I say shunned, I mean that in the strictest sense of the word. They are looked at like they're dead. You do not look at them. You do not talk to them. But in order to come back to the religion, you have to go to meetings. You have to show yourself worthy. And again, we'll get into more about what that is and how that works in later videos. But they have a very strong fear of being disfellowshipped. And again, I am going to read a few more quotes just to put into context how they believe this and see this. All right, this one's from 2017. When someone who has seriously sinned does not repent and refuses to follow Jehovah's standards, he can no longer be a member of the congregation. He needs to be disfellowshipped. When someone is disfellowshipped, we have no more dealings with that person, and we stop talking to him. Now they quote scripture for that? So they're saying, oh, this is in the Bible. Kind of like what I was saying before. The disfellowshipping arrangement protects Jehovah's name and the congregation. Remember the water and the ink? Disfellowshipping is also discipline that can help someone to repent so that he can return to Jehovah. That's what I'm talking about, the framing. Now, notice, return to Jehovah. Return to the organization. You see how that works? Two more quotes just because. Thus, disfellowshipping is what Jehovah's Witnesses appropriately call the expelling and subsequent shunning of such an unrepentant wrongdoer. That's from 1981 in the Watchtower. Next one from the Watchtower as well. A simple hello to someone can be the first step that develops into a conversation and maybe even a friendship. Would we want to take that first step with a disfellowshipped person? So you see how they put like this disdain towards talking to somebody who's disfellowshipped. You don't do it. Attention. I did it once at a convention, and I did it on purpose. They sit in the back at the conventions. There's an assigned seating for Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, so I'm allowed to talk to them. And there was one person who I went to talk to, and he was genuinely shocked that I was talking to him. He's like, and they have to tell you they're disfellowshipped so that they don't affect your standing. And I told him, I'm like, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. What are you doing back here? What's going on? I didn't want to make him feel awkward, and I didn't want to make it seem like I was a Jehovah's Witness talking to a disfellowship person. Really so I did quietly hand them a note to the websites that I thought would be beneficial to him. Hopefully he looked at them. I don't know, it was years ago. But I go to the conventions to kind of plant little seeds and hope that even if just one of them wakes up, then it will be worth it. All right, the next fear that we're going to talk about is the fear of worldly people. People like you, people like me. Because a devout Jehovah's Witness will never watch a video like this. To them, everybody who's not a Jehovah's Witness is worldly. Remember, black and white. The world to a Jehovah's Witness is constantly looked at as being bad. It's Satan's system. You cannot find happiness outside of the organization, just like a bad relationship. Remember the dynamic there? So if you leave, you'll never be as happy as you were with me. So what they do to kind of propel this and promote this is they share like constant stories of people and how they lived before the organization, and then how their lives changed after they found Jehovah's organization. A lot of people can find that churches can do this to an extent where it's about the church instead of finding Jesus directly. Whole other story. And then what they also do is tell stories of witnesses after, say, they've been disfellowshipped and then they're reinstated. They tell stories about how awful and horrible and tragic their life was outside of the organization. So it's very effective. This is a very effective way to keep witnesses away from worldly people. I kind of bring it back to the whole Rapunzel phenomenon. You know, it's just, you're in your tower. Oh man, it's such a good parallel, isn't it? Because you have Mother Gothel, who's like the organization, the tower, the watchtower. Oh man. Okay. So you're up there in the tower. She's up there in the tower. And she's looking at the whole wide world that she's desperately afraid of, because she's been told her whole life that you don't know what the world out there is, just horrible and scary. And you know that song that she sings, Mother Knows Best? I swear, it's like the Watchtower organization's theme song. But that's what it's like. You're told, they're told to fear everything outside of the organization with an intense, real fear, including the people. There's lots of quotes on this, but I'm going to quote this one. It's from the Watchtower, 1987. And it says, while some contact with worldly people is unavoidable at work, at school, and otherwise, we must be vigilant so as to keep from being sucked back into the death-dealing atmosphere of this world. Let the world go along in its way, reaping its bad fruitage in the form of broken homes with illegitimate births, sexually transmitted diseases such as AIDS, and countless other emotional and physical woes. So this is the picture that they paint.
The world is
I would also say
terrible
there's
out there.
many different quotes and teachings in general saying that the outside world is Satan's system. It's satanic, especially if you are from another religion. If I say I'm a born-again Christian and that the Holy Spirit dwells in me, to them, in their ears, they basically just heard that I'm demon-possessed, because they don't believe that the Holy Spirit of God can dwell in you. The Holy Spirit is something very different to a Jehovah's Witness. Again, we will get into more of their actual theology and doctrines later on. All right, a few more things, then I'm actually done. This is a lot longer than I thought it would be. My apologies, guys, but this is a very important topic, and
2 hours.
I find it very relevant if you're going to talk
Not
to a
bad,
Jehovah's
though.
Witness.
A lot
Hopefully
of
it'll
good
be
info.
useful and fruitful to you in your endeavors and learning about this religion. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is guilt. This is a very common emotion for Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a driving emotion.
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of people can understand the anxiety that goes along with guilt. A Jehovah's Witness never knows if they've done enough to please Jehovah, which is why it's like a circle. It's like, that's why they live in fear of Armageddon. They never know if they're doing enough. They overexert themselves trying to attain everlasting life. So a Jehovah's Witness will tell you that they believe in Jesus, that yes, we trust Jesus for our salvation, but the other side of the coin is they must join the organization and do the works of the organization completely to the best of their ability and never stop, hamster wheel, and then they might survive Armageddon. A lot of Christians believe in once saved,
Right.
always saved. That once you have obtained salvation from God, once you are adopted as one of his children, you can't just be unadopted. You can't just not be a child anymore of God. Once saved, always saved. A lot of Christians believe that.
So, even the ones that do believe that, though, don't necessarily believe that you can tell if somebody else is saved. Usually, they're fairly confident that they've been saved, or they're sure that they've been saved, and they can't lose that. But that's not a universal belief among Christians, and some people will say, oh, well, there's the unforgivable sin. What is it? We don't really know for sure, but it's something that if you reject God or blaspheme the Holy Spirit, then you lose your salvation. But the once saved, like, you would never do it if you are saved, kind of thing. So it's usually the once saved, always saved stuff. If you press on that, the Christian will admit that they can only really know if they're saved, and they don't know if other people are saved. So it is a little bit different than witnesses. And witnesses will say that they don't know, and there's, yeah, she's right, like, you have a chance to be saved. And they even go one step further, and I don't know if she might get into this probably in the later videos about doctrine, but they also believe that you could potentially, and I don't think this is necessarily official, they may have changed it since I left, but I do remember they taught, at least to some extent, that you could even potentially be destroyed after Armageddon. So say we're past Armageddon, all the faithful witnesses are in paradise, living on earth, and then there's still the possibility that if you disobey or break God's commandments, or whatever the case may be there, whatever the new rules are in that world, you could be instantly destroyed, because you had your chance to live through Armageddon and the Great Tribulation and all that, and now it's just instant destruction. There's no more waiting around to destroy everybody that's sinning. You sin, you're done. So there's not even like eternal salvation to that respect for the witnesses.
Jehovah's Witness, the Watchtower, they do not. They are completely against that. You can lose your salvation in an instant. So to have that kind of fear over your head and guilt all the time is very difficult to handle for a Jehovah's Witness. There's a quote in the Examining the Scriptures Daily in 2012 I'm going to read. The ransom is totally undeserved, but by exercising faith in it, remember we talked about that before. So they say they have faith, but it's exercising faith. Very different.
Oh.
Millions today will have become friends of God with the hope of everlasting life on paradise earth. Becoming Jehovah's friends, however, is not an assurance that we will remain in such a relationship with him. To escape God's future day of wrath, Armageddon, we must keep on showing our deep appreciation for the ransom paid by Jesus Christ. There's a lot more I could go on about. I do want to encourage you, if you want to learn more about mind control, how it works. This goes into way more detail. There's also lots of really good websites. There's also a lot of other websites out there. Again, I'm going to put it in the description of this video. One last thing I kind of want to touch on very briefly before we end is something called cognitive dissonance. I know a lot of people may not know what this means, but this is actually a term that I can't remember who came up with it. It basically means to retain beliefs or perceptions that conflict with one another. So if a Jehovah's Witness knows, they know that everything that they believe is not true, one belief has to win out from the other. So like oil and water, you can't have both. So what we mentally do is one defaults over the other. That's one reason why it can be explained that a lot of people stay in high control religions or false religions that they know are false. It's because of cognitive dissonance. It's too mentally difficult to take it in, so they don't. I'm sure there's a lot of qualified people out there that could talk more about cognitive dissonance. I am not a sociologist or a psychologist, but that is a term that you're going to hear a lot when it comes to Jehovah's Witnesses
from
and why they hold on to the beliefs they do, as well as other people in high control religions. Well, that was a lot. I'm really glad you guys hung with me this far. I really hope that this was beneficial for you. The next series, the next video I'm going to make goes into their doctrine.
I'm going to pause it there, kind of it out. So do all the YouTube things and like and comment. Thank you very much if you came all the way through this 2-hour long video. I did want to review the whole thing. I'm going to review probably her other videos. Like I said, I do want to do a video about the What the Bible Really Teaches book that they have, because there's some very interesting things in there and tactics that they use for targeting and manipulating vulnerable people, like she was talking about in this bite model. Situationally vulnerable people are a very prominent target of their religious propaganda, and that's who they're going for. They know, like, people that have just lost a loved one or are going through a hard time or whatever the case might be. They're very much more apt to accept this good news that they have, like, hey, you're having a tough time now, isn't the world horrible? But look, God's promised that things are going to get better, and that's a huge thing for witnesses in general. So I'm going to go through, probably, I don't know, I might do some edited videos instead of live videos on her other stuff. I'm going to watch through them and see, probably just take out snippets and add what I can if there's anything valuable there for what the witnesses do believe. But again, hit all the button stuff, bells, likes, whatever, comment. Good stuff. Do the YouTube algorithm stuff. And again, thanks so much if you did make it all the way through 2 hours. Feel free to speed me up. I sped her up by 1.25 speed, so it was going a little bit faster. Still ended up being a long show. But anyway, we will be back later, or posting videos probably, and go through more of this stuff, because hopefully maybe it'll help somebody. Have a good one.